Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Lance French. I'm the Director of Marketing for W&M Environmental, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar on Concrete Batch Plant Wastewater Permit, TXG11. Our speaker today is Jennifer Adams, and she is in our Austin office. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Lance. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. If anyone has any questions, please send them to me through the chat tab on your GoToWebinar window. If we don't get to your question, I will make sure that Jennifer sees it and we give an answer to you as soon as possible. We are recording this webinar and it will be available to rewatch later this afternoon along with the slides that Jennifer used. I will send you an email with a link when they are made available. So enough out of me. Jennifer, take it away.
Thank you, Lance. As you know, the TCQ does renew its water quality permits every 5 years. It's on that schedule just like the national EPA permits. We just went through this with the TXR05 general permit, and now it's time for the TXG11, the concrete batch plant permit. So let's see what's changing. First, kind of like to talk about who can actually use this permit, who can get this permit. It is a specific permit for ready-mix plants and their associated facilities. Specifically, it's SIC codes 3271, 3272, 3273, concrete products, blocks, all that fun stuff. You can actually contact TCQ if you are a related facility, and they can help you figure out if you can also use this permit. It's a little bit different from the TXR05, which is a stormwater-only permit. This permit authorizes stormwater and process wastewater. So what is process wastewater? Quick little definition thing here. The difference between stormwater and wastewater. Obviously stormwater comes from the sky, rain, snow, any sort of precipitation from the sky, falls on your site, runs through your industrial material and creates a discharge. That's an industrial stormwater discharge. So the way I kind of figure out what is process wastewater versus stormwater is what we call the dry day test. You'll notice that picture on the right. It's clear, beautiful day, and there's water all over that yard. All that water, easy way to look at it, all that water right there would be considered process wastewater. Generally, it's water used in your process, in your batch, washing down your trucks, washing down your yard. Anything that does not come from the sky runs through your industrial materials and causes a runoff. So quick little overview on TXG11 versus TXR05, because I know a lot of people are familiar with that TXR05 permit, stormwater only permit. As I said, the TXG11 is for those specific SIC codes along with a determination from the TCQ if you think you're an associated facility, whereas the TXR05 covers a whole list of sectors and SIC codes and businesses that actually perform the same business in that sector regardless of their SIC code. You can authorize a ready-mix plant under the TXR05. They're covered under Sector E, but that is a stormwater only, even under Sector E on TXR05, whereas the TXG11 allows you to discharge both process wastewater and stormwater. So a couple of differences. If you have a stormwater discharge under TXG11, it would be quarterly sampling, whereas it's semi-annual sampling for the TXR05 permit. Of course, wastewater is allowed under TXG11, and that permit requires monthly sampling of your wastewater, and of course there's none of that allowed, no discharge, wastewater discharge allowed under TXR05. The TXG11 also allows for beneficial reuse of wastewater for dust suppression and other things, which we'll go over a little bit later, and that would not be allowed with your wastewater under the TXR05. So implementation. If you've decided the TXG11 makes sense for you, you have a wastewater runoff, you kind of have to figure out I guess the first step would be to figure out what type of water discharge you have. So we know stormwater only. If you can contain all of your wastewater on site and none of it runs off and you only have a stormwater runoff, that is what I would consider a stormwater only discharge. Processed wastewater obviously is when you have that wastewater that goes out through an outfall or somehow it flows off your site. You can easily have both separately if you have some pits separated on one side of your site that discharge, and then you've directed all your stormwater through your stockpiles, for example, to an outfall on the other side of your site. You can have separate discharges. And then what I've seen most commonly at a ready-mix plant is a commingled discharge. So what does that mean? You got your processed water and you got your stormwater. So this would be a separate. Let's pretend this processed water is on one side going out one outfall and your stormwater is running around your stockpiles going out a separate outfall. So what happens when those combine? That is considered a commingled discharge when you have processed water that mixes with stormwater and discharges through an outfall. And basically once that stormwater hits that processed water, it's considered a processed water discharge. One example that I've seen a lot, your washout pits at a ready-mix plant where the trucks wash down, they dump some concrete, dump some water into a series of ponds or pits on site, and then when it rains, all the water flow is directed towards those pits from your site. So when you have that runoff, that rainfall causing a flow across your site, it all ends up in that same pit where your processed water is. That is a commingled pit, really, and then when that pit runs to a little outfall point, that would be a commingled discharge, and in this case that is still considered processed wastewater under this permit. You have to separate that stormwater completely from your wastewater in order to have a stormwater-only outfall. So implementation, again, once you've figured out what kind of discharge you have, if you have stormwater only on your site, if you've managed to somehow contain all of your processed wastewater where none of it runs off, it would have to be where none of that processed wastewater runs off. You can claim stormwater only runoff, and in that case, I would honestly go with that TXR05 general permit. I've actually tried to submit a long time ago an application for a TXG11 for a ready-mix site that had stormwater only runoff, and the TCQ suggested just going with that TXR05 permit. So it's a great option if you're able to contain all your processed wastewater. Obviously that tends to be difficult. You use a lot of water at a ready-mix site, so if you have processed wastewater only, you would definitely want to shoot for that. Processed wastewater discharge only, you would want to shoot for that TXG11 permit. And it would fall under the wastewater requirements only in the permit, so that means there's no stormwater plan required. So if you have both separately, if you have a stormwater only outfall and a processed wastewater outfall only, then you would get that TXG11 permit, and your plant would fall under both requirements. There's a section in there for stormwater only requirements and a section in there for wastewater only requirements, wastewater and commingled requirements. So you would develop for your processed water outfall, you would follow all the requirements from the wastewater section, which I'll go over in a second. And then for the stormwater only outfall, you would develop your stormwater plan and follow the requirements under the stormwater only section. And of course, if you have all commingled discharge, it's all commingled, processed and stormed together, that means you have a wastewater only discharge, and it's the same as a processed wastewater only discharge. And you would follow the requirements of the wastewater side of the permit with no stormwater plan. And the reason there's no stormwater plan required if it's a wastewater only discharge is, when you think about it, common sense, you don't have stormwater running off that site. So you don't need to have you're not required to have a stormwater plan in place to control it. So within the TXG11 permit, let's look at the differences between a stormwater requirement and the wastewater requirement. And again, these wastewater requirements include stormwater commingled with wastewater. So there's there's quite a bit of difference actually between the two. Your stormwater, you only are required to take quarterly samples, whereas the wastewater discharge is monthly, and there are different parameters for those, which I'll go over in a second. Your annual metals are required for both. That's one of the few things that's the same for both. The wastewater discharge has an annual wet test. That's a whole effluent toxicity test where they you take a big gallon of water and they make sure a water flea and a fish is able to survive since it's a wastewater discharge, so it's a toxicity test. And then, like I said earlier, if you have stormwater only out there, you would, or any stormwater discharge, you would have to develop a stormwater plan, but you wouldn't if it's a wastewater only discharge. To go along with the stormwater, the regular stormwater permit, you have quarterly visual monitoring as well for a stormwater discharge. And then they have a new clarification for the 2016 permit, and that's this inactive status, which is only available for stormwater discharges. And I will go into that a little bit more in a minute. So then here's the basic differences between the sampling requirements between the two. Flow, you are required to measure your flow for a wastewater discharge. You only have to report your flow. There's no real effluent limit there. It's just reporting the flow. Oil and grease is the same, standard 15 milligrams per liter for each. TSS is the 50 is standard for stormwater discharges. That corresponds with the TXRO5 permit. And then the 65 milligrams per liter is the same for the wastewater discharge permit this year. None of these limits have changed with the new permit. pH is your standard between 6 and 9 standard units. Stormwater side, you would have to do iron, total iron, and then iron is not required for wastewater because it is a wastewater discharge versus stormwater. And then you would have to do the hazardous metals sampling for both, and there's no difference between the two on those. Once again, remember, wastewater discharges can include stormwater commingled with wastewater. And this is just kind of a brief summary of what you would have to implement if you did have a stormwater-only outfall. You would develop a full stormwater plan for that outfall and any drainage areas leading up to that outfall. And all these details are listed out in the permit. No real changes, not a ton of changes there. So there's your basic summary of the difference between the TXG11 and the TXRO5, and then the implementation, if you do choose the TXG11, choosing your outfall type, stormwater only versus wastewater only. So the permit is renewing in November. Let's talk about those changes that are coming up. So they made a couple definition changes. They've clarified the associated facilities definition, and it's for facilities that are associated with ready-mix plants, such as temporary batch plants, concrete product plants, and then maintenance establishments where you wash or maintain vehicles or equipment associated with a ready-mix plant. The domestic sewage definition was rewritten just to be consistent with the wastewater rules, the TCQ wastewater rules, and it does clarify that a domestic sewage wastewater is not authorized with this wastewater permit. And then they added the total maximum daily load definition for 2016. Another change across all the permits actually that they're renewing right now is this electronic submittal update, and it is being added in order to comply with the new federal electronic reporting rule. So the DMRs, your discharge monitoring reports, where you let the TCQ know the results of all your sampling, those must be submitted online through the Net DMR system as of November 8th, so the date the permit comes into effect. And then the next year, September 1st, 2017, is when all the notices of intent, notice of termination, notice of change, all those have to be submitted using the e-permitting system, which should be STEERS. So you can actually request a waiver for both of these from the TCQ, but you have to have that waiver before you can avoid submitting online. I will say one of the benefits of submitting an NOI online, your notice of intent, is it does allow for immediate coverage after you hit submit in the STEERS system. You're automatically covered after that NOI is submitted. One quick note, this is not a change, it's just something to note, as the delegation of authority. Your reports have to be signed in accordance with the 30 TAC 305.44 rule. Take a look at that and make sure you're signing all your DMRs, inspections, etc. according to those rules. That one actually can be delegated from a company officer or whatever applies to your facility. You do have to submit those delegation letters to the TCEQ and maintain them with your stormwater plan. And then the NOI, NOT, NOC, they have to be signed in accordance by a company officer or, again, whoever applies to your facility, and you cannot delegate those. So that has to be signed by someone in charge with the responsible authority to sign a permit application. And I'll say I had an experience with this a long time ago. I was part of a city inspection at a site, and the inspector noted that there was no letter in the SWIP and couldn't find a record of a letter of delegation being submitted to the TCEQ for this particular company, and was ready to invalidate all the previous year's inspections, even the permit, because the inspector said that the notice of intent was not signed properly according to this rule. So it's definitely one to look into, investigate, make sure you're following those rules. Okay. So there is a clarification on sampling. Initially, the previous permit just stated that that your sample had to be taken after your discharge left the final treatment unit and before it made it to those first receiving waters. So they've updated it this year just to make sure that you are catching it before it goes out that property line. So it's kind of a little illustration here. Make sure you get that sample before or as your discharge runs across your property line, but before it hits those first receiving waters. And then this is going to be, it's not big, it's just, I know I'm used to saying keep your records on site for 3 years, and I've said 3 years for a long time now, so this is new this year. They're changing the record keeping retention requirement to 5 years to correspond with the length of the permit. So just keep that in mind with your training when you're on a site and someone asks how long they have to keep some inspection. It is now 5 years to keep that on site instead of 3. A couple other record keeping changes. They have added language to clarify that your attendance list, when you do your training, your SWIP required training, those have to now be maintained on site. That's just clarification. It didn't actually state that these lists had to be maintained on site, and now it does. Same thing with the rain gauge monitoring. If there's no rain during a given week, you'll have to monitor and record a 0 rainfall total or no rain for the week. And that wasn't specific previously in the permit. And again, these two are relating to a SWIP, so if you have a wastewater, these 3 actually are relating to SWIPs. So if you have a wastewater only discharge, this won't apply to you. But if you do, like a lot of plants have a stormwater discharge as well, these will apply to your stormwater plan. And this one is another clarification. If you do an inspection and you note in your inspection that a change needed to be made based on something you saw or something that was going on during your inspection, and you do not make that update to the stormwater plan, you now have to document that in your SWIP and say why you didn't do it if you, for whatever reason, did not end up making that change. So a lot of written documentation. And this is another change that's kind of going across all the permits. It's based on an EPA update to the minimum analytical levels that they did in 2010. These new levels came into effect in July of 2014, so every time these permits are renewing now, the TCEQ is updating that MAL in there for the metals. So where this really affects ready-mix plants or water samples is when you want to report a 0 discharge versus a below detection limit discharge. The minimum analytical levels are a lot lower than your effluent limits. So as of right now, the lab can detect to your effluent limit, and if it's below the effluent limit detection, you can put below detection limit, but you cannot report a 0 milligrams per liter discharge unless they detect down to these minimum analytical levels. And that really could affect your hazardous metals waiver more than anything, and that's stormwater only again. Again, another change to all the permits. They've just clarified the Endangered Species Act language to apply to aquatic and aquatic dependent species. That word aquatic was not in there previously. And here's the change for this specific permit, the inactive status, and it allows a facility, if they have suspended all their industrial activities and there aren't any industrial materials or activities that could be exposed to stormwater, you can actually take steps to declare your facility inactive for a time. And this is a little bit simpler than submitting a notice of change, saying you're inactive. It's meant to make it easier. If you don't have materials or activities exposed anyway, you can submit a letter to the TCQ in the region and declare your facility inactive for a period of time, and then when you're ready to start back up again, you just have to submit another letter within 30 days of starting up and let them know that you're going to start activities again. So you can, you don't have to do your sampling, inspections, etc. during your inactive facility time. A couple other changes. They've added a little bit of clarification. Right now, if you're an unsatisfactory performer, if that's your classification under TCQ, you could be denied this permit. And this clarification allows someone to go through a hearing and talk to the executive director before their permit is denied or suspended due to being classified an unsatisfactory performer. And then they've updated representative storm event is now a qualifying storm event to be consistent with the TXRF5 permit and those new definitions. And then they have changed the beneficial reuse. Used to be on-site dust suppression, soil compaction, irrigation, fire protection. It's now just beneficial reuse. And it's an update and clarification on the on what you can use your wastewater and stormwater for. And it also updates and says make sure you don't use the wastewater and stormwater to, you don't apply it to land during a rainfall event or when the ground's frozen. So your renewal timeline, if you already have one of these permits, it does expire November 7th. The revised permit will be effective November 8th. And if you do have a stormwater plan existing, you would revise that stormwater plan before you submit your new NOI. If you decide you have a stormwater discharge, you would prepare a stormwater plan. Otherwise, if you just have process wastewater discharge, you can go ahead and prepare your new notice of intent and submit it within 90 days. And I show that as February 5th on the calendar. So once again, November 8th is the revision date. Hopefully November 5th will be the 90 days after renewal to submit your new NOI. If you do have a SWIP, make sure you update that SWIP beforehand. It will have you certify that it's updated before you sign that NOI. So this is a really good time to evaluate what you have on your site, see if you need to make any changes to your SWIP or to your management practices, even if you do discharge wastewater only and aren't technically required to have a SWIP. It's still obviously a good idea to have good management practices on site so you can stay within those effluent limits on that wastewater. I will say the TCQ had this permit on the agenda on October 19th. It should have been approved. They have not posted the final approved permit yet. I doubt there will be any drastic changes to it, but if for any reason there happen to be, we can publish something, we can send out emails letting you guys know of any crazy drastic changes after this draft permit. And that's it. That's all I have.
Wow, well, Jennifer, that was short, sweet, to the point. Great information. I appreciate everything you have. We didn't have any questions, so I'm just going to let everybody know that we will be putting this out on our website later this afternoon, along with the slides that she used. So if you have any questions pertaining to the information, you can email me at lfrench at wh-n.com. Jennifer, thanks again for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks so
Okay.
much, Lane.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, you too. Bye.